Imagine two people with the exact same dream. One stays at the edge, trying to map out every possible obstacle. The other simply steps forward into the fog, deciding to figure out the path as they walk it. 5 years later, the person who stayed at the fork has a pristine plan and 0 results. The person who walked into the fog has a list of failures, 3 pivots, and a growing company. While their intelligence and resources were identical at the start, the miles of track they actually covered created 2 entirely different lives. Curious. We operate under a collective delusion that before we start anything, we need to feel a surge of motivation. We convince ourselves that we need a complete map of the terrain before we ever pack our bags. But waiting for the stars to align, for the timing to be absolutely flawless, guarantees the project dies before it ever begins. We tell ourselves we're just preparing. We spend weeks researching, running analyses, and insisting we need just a little more data to be sure. In reality, all of that endless planning is just procrastination wearing a suit. The delay isn't a lack of information. It is a deep-seated fear. We are terrified of launching something that gets criticized, of looking foolish in front of our peers, or of making a public mistake. That hesitation comes directly from an inner critic that demands absolute flawlessness. It whispers that if the work isn't perfect, it isn't worth doing at all, freezing us in our tracks. Consider the possibility that the clarity and confidence you're waiting for are impossible to achieve while standing still. You cannot think your way into feeling ready. Readiness itself is a mirage, conjured up by overthinking a problem instead of actively solving it. Action produces motivation. Getting your hands dirty and seeing the first small results is what actually generates the drive to keep going. When you look closely at people who consistently build successful businesses or creative projects, they aren't agonizing over their blueprints. The dividing line between those who build and those who dream is simply their speed of execution. This progress bar represents the 75% rule. You prepare until reaching roughly 75% confidence. Waiting for 100% certainty is a trap, locked behind an experience barrier. You cannot plan for that final 25%. It reveals itself exclusively through trial and error. Operating at 75% confidence forces you to encounter the variables that no amount of planning could predict. It is the most efficient way to turn theoretical risk into practical knowledge. This flowchart shifts from a dead-end straight line, where you think forever, into a continuous feedback loop. Decide, act, learn, and improve. Instead of treating choices like life or death commitments, treat them as temporary experiments. If something fails, simply adjust course on the next cycle. The speed and accuracy of your choices increase with every repetition. Making frequent, small decisions builds a capacity for judgment that allows you to act decisively when the stakes actually matter. Momentum builds not from getting every call right, but from making quick, imperfect decisions and adjusting your aim in real time. Motivation is a wildly fluctuating, unreliable emotion. It spikes after a good cup of coffee and vanishes the moment things get difficult. It cannot sustain a long-term ambition. When a project feels too intimidating, the mechanical fix is to break it apart. You chunk a massive goal down into the absolute smallest, easiest actionable steps until it's almost impossible to fail. From there, you remove emotion entirely by relying on rigid daily routines. Setting a fixed wake-up time and dedicated deep work blocks means you don't have to wait to feel inspired before you sit down. These automated systems drastically reduce decision fatigue. By pre-deciding when and how you work, you preserve your mental energy for the actual execution of the task. Consistent discipline and strict automated systems will consistently outperform random temporary bursts of inspiration. Here is the practical reality of doing the work. Nobody launches a product, starts a business, or releases a creative project perfectly on the first attempt. Taking small, imperfect actions begins to stack up. Those tiny steps compound, creating a snowball effect of progress that becomes incredibly difficult to stop. Waiting for the feeling of fear to disappear before acting is a circular trap. Real progress requires executing your protocols while that fear remains in the room, treating it as background noise rather than a stop sign. A completed, flawed project is universally better than a flawless idea that stays in your head. Improvement only ever comes from physical movement. The person who steps forward imperfectly today will consistently outpace the genius who spends their entire life preparing perfectly. Stop waiting for permission. Start before you're ready.